The galaxy was wide, ancient, and full of mysteries. Civilizations rose and fell like waves on an endless sea. Among them, the Veyari Empire stood tall for centuries. Their ships traveled faster than light, their science touched the stars, and their queen wore an armor that was said to be alive. Her name was Serenia, and her armor was no ordinary suit. It was a gift from their first ancestors, a relic passed down through the ages. It shone like flowing silver fire and protected her in war. To the Veyari, it was more than protection. It was a symbol of their strength, their history, and their very identity. But now that armor was broken. The enemy had come without warning. No one knew their name. No one even saw their faces. They appeared in burning ships, attacking planets and vanishing before they could be understood. The Veyari fought bravely, but the war cost them dearly. The greatest loss was during the Battle of Thryallis Moon. Queen Serenia herself had led her fleets, her living armor glowing as a beacon to her people. But the enemy's weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They tore through shields, through steel, even through Serenia's sacred armor. The armor cracked, shattered, and fell silent. The queen survived, but the symbol of her empire lay in pieces. Inside the grand palace on the world of VeyariPrime, the fragments were placed in the Hall of Fragments, a cold circular chamber where shards of the once living armor floated in energy fields. The shards pulsed faintly as though alive but in pain. Scholars and scientists tried day after day to heal it. They brought the most brilliant minds of their species, but every attempt failed. The armor was too old, too strange, too far beyond even their knowledge. The council grew restless. The queen's enemies whispered that the Veyari were weak without her armor. Some worlds even considered breaking away from the empire. One evening, as the council argued in the throne hall, a suggestion was made. "Call the humans," said one of the younger advisors. The chamber grew silent. The humans, those newcomers of the stars. They were not old like the Veyari, nor proud like the Kaltheri, nor wise like the Eilari. They were young, loud, restless. They had only walked the stars for a few centuries, yet they spread quickly, building colonies, trading, and making allies where others hesitated. The council did not like the idea. "Humans?" hissed High Scholar Darius, one of the Queen's most respected advisors. "They are children. What do children know of relics older than the stars themselves?" But the Queen, seated on her broken throne without her shining armor, raised her hand. Her voice was calm and clear. "Children see the world with different eyes. When the wise fail, sometimes it is the child who finds the answer. Call them." And so the message was sent across the stars. On a quiet station orbiting Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, the message arrived. Among the many humans who read it was Elias Rain, an engineer not known for fame or rank. He was not a commander, not a scientist with great awards. He was just a man who had spent his life repairing broken machines, ships, and devices others had given up on. Elias was not extraordinary at first glance. He was lean with sharp eyes that always searched for hidden patterns. He had oil stains on his hands more often than not, and his uniform was rarely perfect. His fellow workers often teased him for his strange methods. "Elias doesn't follow the manual," they would say. "He listens to the machines as if they're alive," and in truth he did. He treated every broken system as if it had a story to tell. While others replaced parts, Elias asked why it had broken. While others saw waste, Elias saw hidden strength. So when the call came from the Veyari Empire, he felt something stir inside him. "Restoring alien armor?" One of his colleagues laughed. "That's impossible." Elias only smiled faintly. Impossible just means no one's tried hard enough. The journey to VeyariPrime was long. The human envoy arrived in sleek white ships carrying scientists, diplomats, and engineers. Among them was Elias, who carried only a small toolkit and a curious mind. The Veyari guards led them through shining corridors of crystal and silver until they reached the palace. Elias looked around in awe. The walls glowed with soft light and great banners of deep blue hung from the high ceilings. At last, he was brought into the Hall of Fragments. There it was, the broken armor. Shards floated in glowing fields humming with faint energy. Elias felt his breath catch. It was not just metal. It was something more. It felt alive like the beating of a wounded heart. Behind him the council stood, their faces cold and doubtful. High Scholar Darius leaned close to another advisor and whispered, "Watch. The human will fail. But Queen Serenia herself stepped forward. Her presence filled the chamber, tall and regal even without her shining armor. She looked at Elias with eyes like molten silver. "You are the one they sent?" she asked. Elias bowed slightly, though awkwardly. He was not used to such grandeur. "Yes, Your Majesty. My name is Elias Rain. I'll do what I can." The Queen studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Do not promise success. Only promise effort." "I can promise that," Elias said simply. That night, Elias began his work. He walked around the floating shards, listening to the hums and vibrations. He touched the fields gently, watching how the fragments responded. He asked questions not to the council but to himself. Why do you glow like this? Why do you resist being joined? What do you need to heal? The Veyari scholars watched in silence, unimpressed. They had run endless scans and tests. They had written equations and built models. But this human, he simply listened. Yet something strange happened. As Elias worked, one shard flickered brighter. Then another. The armor was responding. The next morning, word spread through the palace. "The human touched the shards," whispered the guards. "The armor glowed," said the servants. "Impossible," muttered the scholars. But Queen Serenia heard the news, and for the first time in many cycles, she allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps this human was not so ordinary after all. That was only the beginning. The throne was still broken, the empire still weak, and the armor still far from whole. But in the quiet hum of the Hall of Fragments, a spark of hope had returned. And the one who carried that spark was not a Veyari scholar, not a warrior, but a simple human engineer. The Hall of Fragments was silent except for the faint hum of energy. Shards of broken armor floated in mid-air, glowing softly as if they still carried the memory of life. To the Veyari, these shards were sacred relics. To Elias, they were a puzzle. An impossible puzzle, perhaps, but one that called to him. He stood alone in the chamber, his small toolkit at his side. He had spent hours just observing, sketching lines in his notebook, tracing connections with his eyes. Where others saw scattered fragments, Elias saw patterns. Still, he knew this was no ordinary task. Machines were easy compared to this. Machines had blueprints, rules, limits. But this armor, it felt alive. Every time he moved closer, he sensed a faint vibration in his bones, as if the shards were whispering. Outside the chamber, the Veyari council gathered, speaking in low tones. "This is foolishness," muttered High Scholar Darius, his eyes sharp and proud. "We invited a human to fix what even we cannot. He will only waste time." Another council member, softer in tone, replied, "But you saw it, Darius. The shards glowed when he touched them. None of us have achieved that in all these months." "It was chance," Darius insisted. "The relics mock us by responding to a child's touch." But when Queen Serenia entered the hall, all voices fell silent. Her presence was heavy with authority, even without her armor. She moved with calm grace, her silver eyes fixed on the chamber where Elias worked. "Chance or not," she said, her voice carrying across the hall, "we will watch. For the first time since the war, there is movement. Let us see where it leads." Inside, Elias slowly reached for one shard. The moment his hand neared the energy field, the fragment pulsed like a heartbeat. He stepped back, startled, then leaned closer. "Alive," he whispered. "You're alive, aren't you?" He closed his eyes and pressed his palm against the field. A faint current ran up his arm. Not painful, but strong, like holding a wire buzzing with gentle power. The shard brightened. Another shard across the chamber flickered in answer. Elias smiled faintly. "You're not just pieces. You're a system. You're waiting to be connected again." For 3 days he worked without rest. He made no grand moves, no big promises. He simply listened. He placed sensors not to measure control but to capture rhythm, vibration, and tone. He built small tools from scraps, tiny devices to create harmonics. At night, guards whispered about the human who spoke to the armor as though it were a friend. Some laughed, some wondered, and some quietly began to believe. But to the scholars, Elias seemed strange. Darius scoffed openly when reports came of his progress. "He hums to the shards," Darius sneered during a council meeting. "He sings as though relics of war are toys. This is not science." Yet when Serenia asked for results, the scholars could show none. Their formulas still failed. Their models remained broken, so the queen said, "Let him continue." On the 4th day, Elias made a discovery. He noticed that whenever 2 shards pulsed in unison, Their energy fields reached toward each other like two magnets trying to connect. But if forced, they resisted, flaring with sparks. He realized the fragments did not want to be forced into place. They wanted harmony. They were like pieces of a song, each note needing the right rhythm before it could join the melody. This isn't engineering, Elias whispered to himself. It's music. So he built a device that played tones, each one carefully adjusted to the vibration of a shard. When he played the right note, a fragment would glow brighter. When two notes aligned, two fragments pulsed together. The guards watching from outside widened their eyes. Shards that had floated aimlessly for months were now moving, inching closer to one another. By evening, 3 shards had aligned themselves, glowing with renewed light. That night, Queen Serenia herself came to see the progress. She stepped into the chamber, tall and radiant even without her armor, her robes flowing like silver threads. Elias was bent over his tools, adjusting the frequency of a tone generator. He looked up and quickly stood, bowing slightly. "Your Majesty," he said awkwardly. The Queen studied the fragments around him. Some now floated closer together, glowing brighter than before. For the first time, she felt something stir inside her, a faint connection to the relic that had once wrapped around her body like a second skin. "You have done in days what my people could not in cycles," Serenia said softly. Elias shook his head. "I've only listened, Majesty." "That's all." Serenia tilted her head, her silver eyes curious. "Why do you work so tirelessly? This armor is not yours, not your people's. Why do you care?" Elias hesitated. The question was simple but heavy. Finally, he answered, "Because someone has to. Because it matters to you, and if it matters to you, it matters to me." The Queen's lips curved in the smallest smile. "Stranger humans. You fight for things not your own. Perhaps that is your strength," Elias only shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I just don't like giving up." The following days tested him further. As more fragments aligned, the energy in the chamber grew stronger. Sparks leapt between shards. The humming filled the air, rising and falling like a chorus. Elias grew weary, his hands trembling from long hours. But every time he considered resting, he remembered the Queen's gaze, the weight of her people's hopes, and the faint pulse of the armor that seemed to trust him. Still, trouble brewed outside. High Scholar Darius could no longer remain silent. "This is dangerous," he declared before the council. "The human toys with forces he does not understand. If the relic rejects him, it could destroy itself forever." Others began to agree. Whispers spread through the palace. Some feared the armor might bond with the human instead of their queen. Serenia listened to all voices but said only one thing. "The fragments are moving. Let him continue." On the 10th day, Elias made his boldest attempt yet. He connected 2 of the largest shards, adjusting tones until they pulsed together like twin hearts. Slowly, carefully, they moved toward one another. Energy arced between them, flaring bright and hot. For a moment, it seemed they would repel. The chamber shook. Sparks rained. The guards reached for their weapons, but Elias held steady. He whispered softly, like calming a frightened animal. "It's all right. You're meant to be together. Trust me." The shards paused, then fused. A great light filled the chamber. The sound was like a deep bell ringing through the palace. Everyone froze, awe in their eyes. When the light dimmed, 2 fragments were no longer separate. They had become one piece again, glowing strong and steady. News spread like fire through GalacticPrime. The impossible had happened. The armor was healing. Some celebrated. Others grew fearful. And High Scholar Darius clenched his fists in silence. But for Elias, standing in the center of the Hall of Fragments, sweat running down his brow, it was only the beginning. The armor was not yet whole. The puzzle was far from solved. But for the first time, the impossible seemed possible. And deep within the newly formed piece of armor, a faint voice seemed to echo, not in words, but in feeling. "We remember you." Elias closed his eyes and smiled. The palace of GalacticPrime was alive with whispers. News of the human engineer spread quickly across the empire. Some called him a miracle worker. Others feared what his success might mean. But no voice was louder in its anger than that of High Scholar Darius. Darius had served the Queen for decades. He was a master of ancient knowledge, a guardian of Veyari pride. To him, the sacred armor was not only a symbol of their people, it was proof of their superiority. And now, a human, one of the youngest races in the galaxy, was repairing what he himself could not. Every new glow from the shards felt like an insult. Every whisper of hope attached to the name Elias Rain cut at his pride. In the Hall of Records, Darius paced, his robes of deep green trailing behind him. A group of junior scholars followed nervously, trying to calm him. "This cannot be allowed," Darius muttered. "The relic belongs to the Queen, to the Veyari. If the human succeeds, it will be remembered as his triumph. Generations will say our empire was saved by an outsider. Do you understand the shame of this?" The younger scholars shifted uncomfortably. Some agreed. Others were silent, but none dared to oppose him openly. Darius stopped and clenched his hands. "No, I will not let this happen. If the human insists on touching what he cannot understand, then I will see to it that he fails." Meanwhile, Elias continued his work inside the Hall of Fragments. The armor pieces were slowly awakening. With each success, more fragments pulsed in harmony. The chamber no longer felt silent. It hummed constantly now, alive with shifting energy. The shards almost seemed to breathe. Elias had grown tired but determined. He worked with the patience of someone who loved puzzles too much to stop. He built more tone generators, arranged the shards in careful patterns, and kept detailed notes. But he was not blind to the stares he felt through the observation glass. He knew the council was divided. He knew some wanted him to fail. Still, he pressed on. On the 7th night, he finally left the chamber for a short walk through the palace gardens. The gardens were unlike anything he had seen on Earth. Trees of crystal leaves, flowers glowing with soft blue light, streams that shimmered like liquid glass. As he walked, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he found Queen Serenia herself. "You work too much," she said gently. Elias smiled faintly. "If I stop now, the fragments might lose their rhythm. They're fragile, in a way." The Queen walked beside him, her tall form graceful under the pale stars. "You speak of them as if they are alive." "They are," Elias replied. "Not alive like you or me, but they remember. Every piece carries memory. They just need help remembering who they are together." Serenia studied him for a long moment. "You speak like a poet, not an engineer." Elias chuckled. "Sometimes machines need a poet more than a mechanic." The Queen's lips curved in the smallest smile. Strange human wisdom. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Serenia asked, "Do you truly believe you can restore it?" Elias hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, but I don't know how much time I'll need. Or if I'll survive the final step." Serenia's silver eyes glimmered in the starlight. "Why risk so much for us? We are not your people." Elias looked down at his hands. They were scarred from years of work, the skin rough and stained with oil. "Because someone has to try. Because I've seen too many things left broken when they could have been fixed. I don't like leaving things unfinished." The Queen said nothing more, but Elias noticed her expression soften. While Elias rested, Darius moved in the shadows. He entered the Hall of Fragments late at night when the chamber was empty. Guards respected his rank and allowed him through. His eyes narrowed as he studied the floating shards. "They glow for him," Darius whispered bitterly. "But not for us. Not for those who are their true keepers." He approached one of Elias's tone generators, a small device humming with a soft frequency. With careful fingers, he adjusted the settings just slightly, enough to destabilize the harmony Elias had built. To anyone watching, it would look like an accident. But when the human returned, the shards would reject him. Darius smiled grimly. Let the Queen see his weakness. The next morning, Elias returned and began his routine. He activated the tone generators, expecting the shards to respond as they had before. But something was wrong. The vibrations turned harsh, jagged. Instead of glowing, the shards flickered violently. One fragment even shot sparks, crashing against the containment field. Elias frowned and quickly shut down the device. No, what's happening? He checked his notes, then his devices. One generator was tuned incorrectly, too sharp, almost like a discordant note in a song. He corrected the setting and tried again. But the shards resisted, flaring angrily before falling dim. From behind the glass, Darius whispered to the council, "You see? He cannot control it. The relic is rejecting him." Some nodded, uncertain. Others frowned. But Queen Serenia's gaze remained steady, watching Elias with quiet intensity. Elias refused to give up. For hours he adjusted, recalibrated, and tried again. His hands trembled from fatigue, sweat dripping from his brow. The shards refused to move. Finally he stepped back, breathing hard. For the first time since arriving, doubt crept into his heart. Maybe the scholars were right. Maybe he was just a foolish human trying to touch something far beyond him. He closed his eyes and whispered, "What am I missing?" At that moment he remembered the Queen's words in the garden. "You speak like a poet, not an engineer." "A poet." Elias set aside the devices. He sat cross-legged on the floor of the chamber, surrounded by floating shards. He closed his eyes and began to hum, not through machines, but with his own voice. It was a simple tune, soft and low, echoing gently in the chamber. At first nothing happened, but slowly, faintly, the shards began to pulse again. One by one they glowed, aligning with the rhythm of his song. The council gasped from behind the glass. Queen Serenia leaned forward, her eyes widening. The shards were responding not to machines, but to Elias himself. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was glowing faintly again. Not as strong as before, but alive once more. Elias smiled, relief washing over him. "So that's it. You don't want machines. You want trust. You want someone to give part of themselves." The Queen entered the chamber, her robes brushing softly against the floor. She looked around at the glowing shards, then back at Elias. "You did it again," she said quietly. "How?" Elias shrugged tiredly. "Sometimes you have to stop thinking like an engineer. Sometimes you just have to listen with your heart." Darius, standing among the council, clenched his fists in rage. His sabotage had failed. Worse, it had made the human look even more remarkable. But in his anger he made a silent vow. "This is not over. I will not let him steal our legacy." For Elias, the challenge was growing harder each day. The armor was awakening, but the connection between him and the relic was deepening too. He could feel it tugging at his mind, as though testing if he was strong enough to carry its memories. And for Queen Serenia, watching from the shadows of her broken throne, a thought formed that she dared not speak aloud. Perhaps the human was not just repairing the armor. Perhaps the armor was choosing him. The Hall of Fragments no longer felt like a tomb. Where once the shards had floated in silence, they now pulsed with life. A soft glow bathed the chamber, like the breath of something ancient waking from a long sleep. Elias Rain stood at the center, exhausted but unshaken. He had spent weeks building trust with the fragments one by one. His strange methods, listening, humming, and treating the armor as though it had feelings, had achieved what no scholar could. Yet the hardest step remained. The armor was no longer many pieces. Most fragments had joined into larger sections, glowing strong, alive once again. But the final stage would be dangerous. To restore the armor completely, someone had to connect their mind to it, to act as the bridge between broken memory and new life. And Elias knew that someone had to be him. The council argued endlessly. "It is madness," cried High Scholar Darius, his voice sharp. "The relic was meant for our queen, not for a human. If he links himself to it, the bond could twist. The armor might never accept her again." Others murmured in agreement, but Queen Serenia, seated on her throne, raised her hand. Her silver eyes were calm, but beneath them burned a quiet determination. "And if he does not?" she asked. "Shall we sit here for centuries more, waiting for answers that will never come? Our enemies gather even now. We cannot afford endless delay." Darius bowed his head, but his jaw was tight with anger. "Majesty, if the human fails, the relic may be lost forever." Serenia's gaze moved to Elias, who stood quietly, listening to the debate. "And if he succeeds, Darius, then the legacy of our people lives on." That night, Elias prepared himself. He sat alone in his quarters, staring at his hands. They shook slightly, though whether from fatigue or fear he could not tell. The Queen entered silently, her presence filling the room like a calm tide. She studied him for a moment before speaking. "You are afraid," she said gently. Elias laughed softly. "Of course I'm afraid. Linking my mind to alien armor that's older than your history books? That's not exactly safe." "You could die," Serenia said plainly. He met her gaze. "Yes, I could. But if I don't try, then all this effort means nothing." The Queen stepped closer, her tall form casting a long shadow. "Why take such risks, human? You owe us nothing." Elias hesitated, then said simply, "Because I fix things. That's who I am." If something is broken, I can't just walk away. Serenya's eyes softened, and for a moment the weight of a queen slipped away, leaving only a woman who carried too many burdens. She whispered, "Strange are humans, always fighting, always mending." Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe that's our purpose in the stars." The next morning, the Hall of Fragments was filled with guards, council members, and the Queen herself. The air buzzed with tension. Elias stood in the center, a small device on his wrist to help stabilize the neural connection. The shards floated around him, glowing brighter than ever before, as if they were eager. He took a deep breath. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see if you'll trust me." He reached out, placing his hands on two of the largest armor sections. At once, a surge of energy shot through him, knocking the breath from his lungs. The chamber shook. Sparks danced across the floor. "Containment field holding," a guard shouted. Elias gritted his teeth, forcing himself not to let go. The energy poured into his mind, images, sounds, emotions. He saw battles long past, warriors of the Veyari who had once worn the armor. He felt their triumphs, their pain, their sacrifices. The voices of the past whispered in his head. "Who are you? You are not Veyari. Why do you touch us?" Elias clenched his fists, sweat dripping down his face. "Because someone has to. Because she needs you." The shards pulsed violently, testing him, pressing against his thoughts. It was like standing in a storm of memory, every gust threatening to tear him apart. But Elias held on. He focused not on himself, but on Queen Serenya, standing at the edge of the chamber. He remembered her eyes, her quiet strength, the burden she carried for her people. "I'm not doing this for me," Elias whispered through gritted teeth. "I'm doing it for her." Something shifted. The storm softened. The shards pulsed together, glowing brighter than ever. Slowly they began to move, flowing through the air like streams of silver water. The fragments gathered around Queen Serenya, circling her tall form. Gasps filled the chamber as the armor reformed piece by piece, sliding across her body with living grace. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Plates of silver and crystal fused seamlessly, glowing veins of energy running through them like lifeblood. The armor wrapped around her arms, her shoulders, her chest, until she stood once again in full radiant power. For the first time since the Battle of Thryallis Moon, the Queen of the Veyari wore her sacred armor, but the process was not gentle for Elias. Every shard that left him carried part of his strength. His knees buckled, his vision blurred. He felt the armor's memories tearing through him, demanding more, demanding trust, demanding his very essence. His body trembled, but he forced himself to remain conscious. If he let go now, the bond would shatter. "You can do this," he muttered. "Just a little longer." At last, the final shard fused, locking into place with a flash of light that filled the chamber. Queen Serenya stood tall, her silver armor glowing like a living star. The council fell silent, awestruck, and Elias collapsed to the floor, barely conscious. The queen stepped forward, her armor moving with her as if it were part of her body. She knelt beside Elias, lifting him gently. "You did it," she whispered. Elias forced a tired smile. "Told you. I don't like leaving things broken." Serenya studied him, her eyes filled with something rare, gratitude and perhaps even admiration. "You gave yourself for my people. You risked everything." "Worth it," Elias murmured before losing consciousness. The council erupted in chaos. Some cheered, praising the miracle they had witnessed. Others whispered fears. What if the armor now held a bond with the human? What if he had changed it forever? High Scholar Darius stood at the edge, his face pale with rage. His voice shook as he said, "This is not victory. This is corruption." The relic was touched by alien hands. "It will never be pure again." But when Serenya rose, her armor gleaming, her voice silenced all others. "The armor is restored," she declared. "Our symbol lives. And it was a human who gave it back to us. Remember that." Her words struck deep. For the first time in centuries, the Veyari had witnessed something they thought impossible. And it had been achieved not by their greatest scholar, but by an outsider who refused to give up. That night, Serenya visited Elias where he lay recovering. He stirred weakly as she approached. "You should rest," she said softly. Elias groaned, his eyes half open. "And miss the celebration?" The queen smiled faintly. "The celebration is yours, not mine." Elias shook his head. "No, the armor belongs to you. It always has." Serenya studied him for a long moment, then said, "Perhaps, but its awakening, its rebirth belongs to both of us." To the Veyari and to humanity. Elias closed his eyes, too tired to reply, but her words stayed with him. Outside, in the palace gardens, the stars shone brighter than ever. The queen's armor glimmered under their light, restored to its full glory. But in the shadows, High Scholar Dearest whispered to himself, his voice sharp with venom, "This human will not be remembered as a savior. I will not allow it. If he threatens our legacy, then I will be the one to end him." The armor was whole. The queen was strong again, but the seeds of conflict were far from gone, and Elias Rain's greatest trial was yet to come. The palace city of the Veyari had not known such light in centuries. From every tower and bridge, glowing banners drifted in the air, shining like rivers of silver. Music echoed across the halls, and laughter returned to places where silence had reigned too long. Queen Serenia walked among her people in her restored armor, radiant as the stars. Each step she took brought cheers, every motion a symbol of hope. For the Veyari, their world was alive again. But for Elias Rain, the human who had made it possible, the celebration was a blur. He rested in the queen's guest wing, too weak to rise. The effort of awakening the armor had nearly broken him, and though healers worked day and night, his strength was slow to return. Yet even as he lay in silence, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had done what no one else could. He had fixed something thought lost forever. The council met again, but this time the arguments were sharper, more dangerous. "The armor is restored," Serenia said firmly. "We are stronger now than we have been in 1,000 years. And we owe that strength to Elias Rain." High Scholar Dearest rose, his face a mask of anger. "Majesty, the relic is tainted. This human has bound himself to it. You saw how the fragments responded. It was not only you they accepted, it was him." Murmurs filled the chamber. "He may have altered the bond. The relic is sacred. What if it no longer belongs to the Veyari? What if the human controls it?" The queen silenced them with a raised hand. Her voice was cold but steady. "No one controls the armor but me. It responds to me as it always has." Elias merely gave it the strength to awaken. Without him, we would still be waiting in the dark. But Darius pressed on. "He is dangerous. If he remains here, whispers will spread. Doubt will fester. The people will ask, is their queen's strength truly hers or borrowed from an outsider?" The council fell silent. The words were poison, yet they could not be ignored. That evening, Serenia visited Elias again. He was awake this time, sitting by the window, gazing at the twin moons above the city. "You look troubled," Elias said softly, without turning. The queen sighed. "My council fears you. Darius speaks against you at every breath." Elias chuckled weakly. "I'm used to that. Back home, engineers were always ignored until something broke. Then suddenly everyone remembered we existed." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You do not seem afraid." "Oh, I am," Elias admitted. "But not of your council. I'm afraid that maybe I've changed the armor, that maybe I left too much of myself in it." Serenia stepped closer. "And if you did, then it isn't purely yours anymore," Elias said quietly. "It's partly human, and I don't want to take that from you." The queen's hand touched the edge of her armored gauntlet. "Perhaps that is not theft, Elias. Perhaps it is unity. My people and yours, together in something greater." But unity was not what Darius desired. In secret, the High Scholar gathered those who shared his fear. They met in the shadow of the lower archives, whispering of betrayal, corruption, and exile. "The queen is blinded by gratitude," Darius hissed, "but I see clearly. The relic does not belong to him. If the human stays, he will poison our legacy. He must be removed." One of his followers asked nervously, "You mean banished?" Darius's eyes narrowed. "Banished if the queen allows it. But if not, then by other means the seeds of conspiracy were planted days past." Elias grew stronger, though his body still bore the marks of strain. The queen visited often, asking his thoughts not only on machines but on people, on leadership, on the fragile balance of trust. Their bond deepened, not as ruler and subject but as two beings who carried heavy burdens. Serenia began to see the galaxy differently, through human eyes, through the stubborn courage of someone who fixed what others abandoned. And Elias, in turn, began to feel something he had never expected among the stars: belonging. The first true test of the restored armor came sooner than anyone wished. Scouts returned with grim news. The Karth Dominion, sworn enemies of the Veyari, had sent fleets across the border. They had heard whispers that the relic was whole again, and they sought to destroy it before the Queen could wield it in war. Panic spread through the city. Some feared the armor would fail, that the humans' bond had weakened it. Others placed their faith in their Queen, their voices rising in chants of her name. Elias, still recovering, stood beside Serenia as she prepared for battle. "You don't have to fight," he said quietly. Her eyes met his. "Yes, I do. My people must see their Queen strong, and the Dominion must learn that the Veyari are not broken." The armor glowed brighter as if it heard her resolve. "Then go," Elias said, forcing a smile. "And when it breaks again, I'll fix it. That's my job." For the first time, Serenia laughed, a sound like music carried on wind. Strange human, always mending what others fear to touch. The battle was fierce. The Dominion fleets rained fire upon the Veyari world, their ships dark and jagged. But when Queen Serenia rose into the sky, clad in her living armor, hope blazed across the battlefield. The armor was no relic now. It was alive. Blades of light formed around her hands. Shields of crystal deflected enemy fire. She moved like the storm, unstoppable. And through it all, Elias felt echoes in his mind. Though he was far from the fight, faint whispers reached him, flickers of the bond he had forged. He sensed her triumphs, her strain, her will. It was as though a small part of him fought alongside her. By dawn, the Dominion retreated, broken and humiliated. The Veyari world stood free. The city rejoiced. The Queen returned victorious, her armor unscathed. But not everyone celebrated. In the shadows of the council chambers, Darius struck. He confronted Elias alone, his eyes burning with fury. "You think you are a savior," he spat, "but you are a threat. The Queen is bound to you now. And if you ever turn against us, she will fall." Elias raised his hands calmly. "I didn't do this to gain power. I did it to help." "Lies," Darius hissed, drawing a blade of pure crystal. "Better you die now than risk our future." The strike came fast. But Elias was not alone. A flare of silver light filled the chamber as the Queen herself appeared, her armor responding to danger before she even entered. The blade shattered against her shield. Her voice was cold as steel. "Enough." Darius froze, his ambition collapsing under her gaze. Guards seized him, dragging him away. His whispers ended in silence. Later, Serenia stood with Elias under the stars. "You risked much," she said quietly. "And nearly paid the price," Elias shrugged. "Fixing things isn't always safe. Sometimes the break fights back." She studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke words that would echo through their histories. "From this day you are no longer outsider. You are Veyari honor, a title given only to those who shape our destiny. Your legacy will be remembered with mine, human and Veyari, together." Elias felt something warm rise in his chest. He had come here as an engineer, a stranger among stars. But now he was part of something greater. Years later, when songs were sung of the Queen in her radiant armor, the verses always spoke of the human who restored it. Not as a conqueror, not as a ruler, but as a mender, one who saw what was broken and refused to leave it that way. And in the great halls of the Veyari, carved in silver and crystal, stood two figures side by side, Queen Serenia armored in light, and Elias Rain, the human engineer whose legacy lived forever.